Here at RUSI, we speak to around 8,500 students who are in professional military education every year. 18 staff colleges around the world in everything from a single lecture to a 2-week-long work package. And on themes as diverse as Great Pack Competition, the future of alliances, or hybrid warfare, active measures, the deep battle, or the reality of contemporary conflict. We have a special relationship with Ecole de Guerre. In Paris, the students don't have a deeply intensive laid out syllabus which they've got to crack through during that year. They do that work before they get to the college. And as a result, the year they spend in Paris, they look at topics which are designed to exercise their intellect, to extend their idea of concepts of doctrine, to change how they think about great problems. We've been privileged over the past 3 years to set them a series of challenges every year, and in conjunction with the English department there, the students spend their year looking at a selection of topics that we give them and deciding to write a dissertation thesis on one of those topics. The topics we select aren't necessarily those that are around the big issues of the day. They're not even necessarily over the big issues over the next 2 to 3 years. But they are issues and challenges that we think need looking at. They're issues that might extend to 20 or 30 years out. They're conceptual and they're designed to stretch them intellectually, to bring something else to bear as they go into the next parts of their careers. Now, normally, at the culmination of their presentations, at the end of their academic year, the students present their findings and their paper to a panel who then challenge them, question them, and generally dig into some of the detail that sits behind it to really push them and challenge some of the debating skills. And again, they do this in English. What's even better is that we found that we have the support of both Vice Chiefs of Defence Staff from the UK and France who make their way to London to RUSI and join these sessions, each of which has been fascinating, challenging and insightful. This year, of course, that wasn't possible. It wasn't possible for the students to come to London to present or to bring people into a big room to do the challenge sessions. So we did it virtually. And we weren't able to bring a whole variety of others to come and view what they saw. So instead, we did it virtually. And the attached presentations that you can see in the following clips are the findings of the students and their papers. The students are really to be congratulated for what they have delivered. It's quite astounding not only that they've achieved this in a year, but in a second language and delivered a paper as well as a compelling and good presentation at the end of it. The whole range of topics that we gave them for the last year were everything from the reliance on logistics, proxies in space, the morphing of cyber and space challenges, contested theatre entry. But perhaps the two most interesting presentations that you'll see were on, firstly, the concept of parity in military terms, and secondly, the changing rules of warfare and what they mean for the future. The students of both of these presentations really excelled themselves, and we're really grateful to the support from Rob Johnson at CCW and numerous others who helped them through what is a difficult intellectual period for them. We really enjoyed working with them and hope you enjoy the presentations that follow. Thanks very much for watching. The second research question that we gave to the students was around the normalisation of chemical and biological weapons on the battlefield. Specifically in Syria, some reports have indicated as many as 300 uses of chemical and biological weapons since the conflict began. The lack of any credible Western response after their first evidence use in 2013 has signalled to adversaries and competitors that such weapons are now no longer considered to be outlawed, since their use has no military repercussions. Subsequent attempts by the Trump administrations to reinstate red lines over their use has been inconsistent and sporadic, according to some. Even the use of a nerve agent by Russia in the UK has not had a significant response. Such use is increasingly hard for Western military audiences to imagine, particularly if employed at scale. The era of large-scale decontamination capabilities, regular training in such environments, and equipment built with such environments in mind has long passed. Has the use of chemical and biological weapons on the battlefield been normalised? Could an enemy resist using chemical and biological weapons in such circumstances? How would Western forces, militaries, commanders, politicians and the public react to their use on a large scale or indeed a smaller one? Is the re-establishment of red lines in these cases possible? This is the outline that was passed to the students. One team took up the challenge and produced a most interesting paper. Their presentation follows, which I hope you enjoy as much as I did.
We choose to deal with the subject of the CBRN threat because it seems to us to be a very real threat. Since then, the health crisis linked to COVID-19 has demonstrated how sensitive Western societies are to manifestations of fear. The experience of this pandemic will certainly have positive effects on the organization and the sovereignty of our health systems. However, other threats should not be overlooked, as they are no less likely than a second wave of this disease. Thus, identifying which of the CBRN areas is most likely to concern us and knowing all the ins and outs seems all the more topical to us. After 7 months of studying this subject, we are now convinced that chemical threat is increasing, multiplicity of actors, accessibility, employment, benefits and interest, and seems the most likely to be used across the CBRN spectrum in the near future. Many organizations, resolutions, conventions, initiatives, and partnerships have already existed to cope with it. Their usefulness have been proved, but their effectiveness could be improved with a gap-focused approach about coordination, transparency, power to impose sanctions, disinformation, and political influence, and promoting interest in combating this threat. To cope with these chemical threats, we propose 2 axes of effort based on existing system and technological innovation. It's these 4 points that we are going to address now. About the situation, chemical weapons were first used on a large scale in the First World War. They were perfected during the 20th century and massively produced during the Cold War, even though their use was prohibited by the 1925 Geneva Protocol. It was to destroy all these stocks and prohibit any new production that the CWC was established in 1993. Since it entered into force on April 29th on 1997, declared chemical weapon stockpiles have been progressively destroyed. As of December 2019, 97.51% of the original declared volumes have been destroyed. Yet, at the same time, the number of incidents involving a chemical substance have increased, mainly in the context of the civil war in Syria, where more than 80 attacks were reported from 2013 to 2018. For their users, chemical weapons are of free interest. Easy access, simple utilization and bigger psychological effect for terrorists, tactical and operational gains for armed forces, amplified diplomatic or strategic message for states. That's the reason why we consider chemical weapons to be the most likely within the CBRN spectrum to be used in the near future.
To address the threat of chemical weapons, there are today a number of organizations, resolutions, conventions, initiatives, and partnerships that can be divided at the national, regional, and multilateral level. Their interlinkages are numerous. Insofar as chemical threats need a global response, they will be all the more effective if they focus on cooperation and coordination between them. First of all, states generally have national strategy to prevent and respond to a chemical attack. Intelligence, monitoring, civil security and health services, as well as armed forces and internal security forces, implement this strategy. Moreover, by drawing on national know-how and lessons learned, it is necessary to build a regional response. On the one hand, the European Union is developing its capacities mainly by improving coordination. On the second hand, NATO has equipped itself with human and material operational capabilities, for example, through the creation of multinational chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear defense battalion, which has been operational since 2003. But the more interesting response to cope with that threat must be found in multilateral devices. You have here a non-exhaustive list, more detailed in our essay. I will just briefly detail one organization that has a strong impact on global governance. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, based in The Hague, is responsible for the implementation of the Chemical Weapons Convention, for example, through the verification of destruction processes of national stockpiles and the inspection of industrial chemical facilities. The OPCW also promotes international cooperation for the peaceful use of chemistry and provides assistance and protection to states threatened by chemical threats. We will now see why these devices are useful, but of limited effectiveness. First, limited coordination and cooperation. While objectives often converge, processes and coordination between the previous devices often remain imperfect. Of course, intelligence is a sensitive data, but there is also a problem of interest. It is easily understandable that education or health are subjects that are more taken into account, even if it means that the chemical threat is relegated to oblivion. Secondly, the influence of international politics. Today, the United States impose international law and standards, which influences positively or negatively in some regional or international mechanisms to combat the chemical threat. Those politicized devices are subject to internal and external influences and disinformation. International organizations are also concerned by the return of some empires that challenge this supremacy. Technical problems aggrave this observation, confirming the high accessibility of the chemical weapon and its difficult detection. For industrial communities, CBRN represents nowadays niche capabilities, requiring specific and not multipurpose equipment and infrastructure related to a generally non-priority subject and with limited budgets. But one of the most serious limitations is the limited investigative and sanctioning capacities. As long as the perpetrators of chemical attacks go unpunished, it will be difficult to deter future ones. Let me elaborate on that a little bit. In order to convict the perpetrators of a chemical attack, a process of evidence collection, validation, and analysis must be conducted. While this is ongoing, it is possible for perpetrators to intervene to slow down or never block this process. Another factor is the safety of OPCW investigators. So there are enormous difficulties to investigate and attribute responsibility for a chemical attack. The consequences is that in recent years, no international judicial body has been able to take up on case on chemical weapons. If the United Nations can legitimize a response to the use of chemical weapons, they fail to take action because of veto or non-interference in sovereign country affairs. Faced with these observations, we studied two types of recommendations. As far as recommendations based on existing systems are concerned, it is a question of correcting, optimizing, and creating synergies. Three categories of recommendations can be found with interlinkage. I will just list them and detail one subpart only. Firstly, domestic national measures that are actions taken by a country to strengthen itself. It is about mobilizing national CBRN communities and improving resilience of population, military, and government. Secondly, outward-looking national measures. that are action taken by a country towards the outside world. This involves strengthening intelligence capabilities through the entire .mlpfi spectrum and introducing clear and applicable red lines. Thirdly, global government measures, which are the interactions, cooperation, and coordination actions between countries. We found one of these recommendations particularly interesting. It concerns the strengthening of the judicial response. A glimmer of hope appeared in 2018. Despite strong objections from Syria and its allies, including Moscow, a majority of OPCW member states vote in favor of strengthening the OPCW's powers, allowing it to designate the perpetrator of a chemical attack and no longer just to document the use of such a weapon. On April 2020, the OPCW's Identification and Investigation Team concluded that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the perpetrators of a chemical attack in 2017 in Latmena Syrian city were individuals belonging to the Syrian Arab Air Force. However, the investigation team is not a judicial body with the power to attribute individual criminal responsibility. It is now up to the UN Secretary General and the international community to take the measures deemed necessary and appropriate. These very precise accusations must be an opportunity to rethink the policy of sanctions against Syria and its allies involved. We propose some solutions in our essay. In conclusions, today's solutions cannot be based on a total revolution on regional and international arrangements. Rather, they should be seen more as amendments combined with good risk control and a constructive international policy tempo.
Technological developments will strengthen the capacity to combat the threat of chemical weapons, whether state or terrorist, in 3 areas. Remote detection capability in order to facilitate the work of inspection team. So in order to facilitate the work of inspection team, taking advantage of miniaturization of systems and development of UAV and satellite capabilities. Solution exploiting the properties of genetically modified bacteria or plants are also possible in the medium term. Fast and multispectral detection capability to strengthen borders control, even in a context of extended merchandises and passengers flux. As far as the European Union is concerned, a significant impetus has been given by successive plans to support research, some of the subject of which concern border protection and fight against trafficking. The creation of the European Defence Fund will also contribute to the financial support of this research. These 2 areas will enable the specialized unit and teams to have more efficient equipment at their disposal to carry out their mission. But everyday objects can also be put to good use. Early warning capability based on everyday devices such as air quality monitoring devices or connected objects. For example, connected watches already capable of monitoring heart rate and or blood pressure and equipped with a 3D accelerometer coupled with 4G smartphones can detect unusual crowd movement associated with a suspicious evolution of biodata. This makes it possible to reduce the impact of a possible attack by disseminating the alert as quickly as possible and to engage appropriate means of intervention. To be effective and credible, these innovations must not be hyper-specialized devices, but part of a multi-purpose systems. As a conclusion, chemical weapons are an increasing threat. All the more since the crisis of COVID-19 has questioned our societies about their governance on national, regional, and global aspect, sovereignty and strategic autonomy. Tomorrow capabilities are being built today, and a credible defense system needs a broad and multi-domain response.